"Don't look down there, that's off limits." The rancher looked and did something horrifying. Samuel had lived on the ranch for as long as anyone in the nearby town could remember. The ranch was large, stretching over hundreds of acres of rolling hills, golden fields, and patches of thick forest. For Samuel, it was not just land, it was a way of life, a home built from sweat, patience, and years of careful work. From dawn to dusk, he moved from one task to another, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending to crops. Every corner of the ranch carried memories of long days and quiet nights, and Samuel knew each one like the back of his hand. Despite his hard work, Samuel was a quiet man. He didn't go into town often, and when he did, he kept to himself. People in the town called him a mystery. They admired his work ethic, his ability to run the ranch almost single-handedly, and the way he cared for his animals. But at the same time, there was something about him that kept people at a distance. Samuel preferred it that way. Life was simpler when he was alone with his animals and the land he loved so much. One part of the ranch, however, was different. At the very edge of his property, there was a deep, dark ravine. It was overgrown with thick bushes and wild trees, and its depth made it dangerous. Even the bravest of hikers would hesitate to go near it. Samuel never went close, not because it was physically dangerous alone, but because it held something in the past that he could not face easily. He had always told anyone visiting the ranch that this part of the land was off limits. "Don't go down there," he would say firmly, looking into their eyes so that they understood he was serious. "It's not safe, and it's not for anyone to see." Visitors never pressed the matter too much. Everyone could feel there was more to Samuel's warning than just concern for safety. The children in the town whispered stories about the ravine. Some said it was haunted. Others said Samuel had buried treasure there long ago. Samuel would just shake his head when he heard such rumors and continue with his work. He never corrected them, and he never confirmed anything either. The mystery stayed, quietly hidden at the edge of the ranch. Samuel's days were steady and predictable. He would wake up before sunrise, make himself a cup of strong coffee, and walk through the barns to check on the animals. He spoke to each horse, cow, and dog as though they understood him completely, and in many ways they did. They were his companions, his friends, the only beings that shared his life fully. After feeding and caring for them, he would head out into the fields to inspect the fences, repair any damage, and make sure the crops were growing well. Each task, no matter how small, was done with care. Samuel believed in doing things right the first time, even if it took longer. Though the work was exhausting, there was a certain peace in it. Samuel enjoyed the quiet sounds of the ranch, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the distant call of birds, the lowing of cows in the fields. These sounds were soothing, reminding him of a time when life was simpler, when the world was not as heavy as it sometimes felt. At night, after the work was done, he would sit on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the hills, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. The ranch felt like a safe bubble, a place untouched by the chaos of the world outside. But the ravine was always there, a shadow in the distance. Even when Samuel tried to ignore it, even when he focused on his work, it lingered in his mind. He remembered why he had fenced it off and why he had warned people never to go near. Years ago, something had happened there that changed him forever. At first, he had tried to forget, thinking time would erase the memory, but it never truly did. It was like a quiet whisper in the back of his mind, reminding him of the fragility of human life and the mistakes people could make when faced with fear or curiosity. Visitors to the ranch occasionally asked about it, their voices light, jokingly teasing. "Come on, Samuel, what's down there? You can't just tell us not to look," they would say, laughing. Samuel would straighten, his expression serious, and reply firmly, "I said it's off limits. I'm not joking, and you shouldn't either." Sometimes, the playful curiosity in people made him uncomfortable. He had learned that some things were better left unexplored, that not every question needed an answer, especially when it could awaken memories best left buried. One morning, as the sun rose over the hills, Samuel noticed signs of visitors approaching the edge of the ravine. It was unusual, because people rarely came this far without being invited. Samuel felt a twinge of anxiety. He walked quickly to intercept them, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "I told you," he said calmly but firmly, "this area is not for visitors. Stay back." His voice carried the authority of someone who had seen too much to be questioned. The visitors nodded, retreating slowly, though Samuel could see the flicker of curiosity in their eyes. As he watched them leave, Samuel couldn't help but feel a small, uncomfortable stirring inside him. Part of him wondered what would happen if he allowed himself to look again. He had avoided the ravine for so long, but the thought of seeing it, of understanding it fully, lingered in the back of his mind. He shook his head and returned to his work, trying to focus on the familiar routines. Still, the shadow of the ravine seemed to follow him, quiet and unyielding, a reminder that some parts of life could never be fully controlled. Throughout the seasons, Samuel's routine continued. The ranch thrived under his care, and he remained a respected figure in the town, even if people never fully understood him. Yet every time he walked near the edge of the ravine, a memory would flicker. A day long ago, a choice made, a moment he wished he could undo. Life on the ranch was peaceful in appearance, but beneath the surface, Samuel carried a secret weight. The land had been kind to him in many ways, but it also held the evidence of human fallibility, of moments when fear and curiosity intersected in ways that left permanent marks. In the evenings, when the ranch grew quiet and the sky filled with stars, Samuel sometimes found himself standing near the ravine, staring at its depth without moving closer. He could hear the wind whispering through the trees, carrying with it the sound of the past. And though he had warned everyone else to stay away, he couldn't deny the pull it had on him. The ravine was more than a physical boundary. It was a barrier between the present and the past, between safety and the unknown. And Samuel knew, deep down, that one day he would have to face it. For now, he returned to his animals, his fields, his daily tasks. Each day was a balance between routine and memory, between work and reflection. And though the ravine remained at the edge of the ranch, silent and foreboding, Samuel continued to live his life as best he could, carrying with him the lessons of the past and the quiet knowledge that some boundaries exist for a reason. The summer that year was hotter than usual, and the ranch seemed to glow under the bright sun. Samuel's days were long, filled with work as always, but there was a strange feeling in the air. Something was different, though he couldn't put his finger on it. The town had sent a small group of friends to visit the ranch for a weekend getaway. They were curious about the life Samuel led, about the animals, the wide-open fields, and of course, the forbidden ravine. The friends arrived in the afternoon, dusty from the long drive and laughing at the excitement of being away from the town. There were 3 of them, 2 young men and a woman. They were all polite but adventurous, and it didn't take long for them to notice the way Samuel treated the ranch as both a home and a sacred space. He gave them a tour, showing the barns, the grazing fields, and the areas where the crops were growing. Every step he took was measured and careful, and every animal seemed to respond to him as if it understood his presence completely. When they reached the edge of the property, one of the friends finally dared to ask, "What's that over there?" They pointed toward the ravine in the distance, its shadow stretching across the grass like a dark wound in the land. Samuel's expression immediately changed. His eyes narrowed slightly and his jaw tightened. "Don't go there," he said quietly but firmly. "It's off limits. That area is not for anyone, including you." The friends exchanged glances, a mixture of curiosity and disbelief in their eyes. "Come on, Samuel," the woman said, teasing. "It can't be that dangerous. You always say that, but we've never even seen it. Maybe it's just a small dip in the ground or something." Samuel shook his head slowly. "I'm serious. Don't go near it. Some things aren't meant to be seen, and this is one of them. Trust me." His voice carried a weight that silenced the group for a moment. They could feel there was more to his warning than just safety. There was something in his tone, a seriousness that demanded respect, even if it sparked curiosity at the same time. Despite their respect for him, curiosity is a powerful thing. That evening, as the sun began to sink behind the hills, Samuel watched the friends explore the ranch. They laughed and played, running around the open fields, chasing the dogs and taking pictures of the scenery. They were careful not to approach the ravine, but Samuel could see the glint of curiosity in their eyes. They whispered to each other, pointing occasionally toward the forbidden area, and Samuel felt a familiar unease settle in his chest. After dinner, the group gathered around a small fire in the yard. Samuel sat in his usual chair, sipping from a cup of coffee, while the friends roasted marshmallows and told stories. The firelight flickered across their faces, and the warmth of the flames contrasted sharply with the tension Samuel felt inside. The ravine was always there in his mind, a silent presence that seemed to watch him as much as he watched it. One of the friends, emboldened by the fire and the night, finally spoke. "Samuel, tell us what's really down there. Why is it off limits? You've been on this ranch all your life. There has to be a story. You can't just leave it a mystery forever." Samuel's eyes darkened as he set his cup down. For a moment, he was silent, staring into the fire as though the flames might give him the answer he was searching for. He knew he could tell them part of the story, but the full truth was something he had buried deep, even from himself. Some memories were too painful, too raw, and looking at them again could bring a storm of emotions he wasn't sure he could handle. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Many years ago, something happened near that ravine. It was a day like any other, but it changed everything. I made choices then that I regret to this day. Some boundaries are meant to protect not just the body, but the mind. That's why I tell you, don't go there. Some things aren't meant to be discovered." The friends listened intently, their faces serious now. The playful teasing was gone, replaced by a quiet respect. Samuel's words carried the weight of someone who had lived through more than most could imagine. Yet, the human mind is naturally curious, and even as they promised not to go near the ravine, the image of the dark, mysterious area stayed in their thoughts. Later that night, when the friends had gone to sleep in the small guest house on the ranch, Samuel found himself unable to rest. He walked outside, the cool night air brushing against his face, and he stared toward the ravine. The moonlight made it look even deeper, even darker, and for a moment he could see the memories from years ago flashing in his mind. He remembered the heat of that day, the sound of the wind in the trees, and the moment he had chosen a path that would haunt him for years. Samuel knew that he had avoided this place for decades, but seeing it again now, so close and so real, stirred something inside him. It was a mix of fear, guilt, and curiosity. He wondered what would happen if he just looked a little closer. Would it bring relief to finally face it, or would it open a door he wished had remained closed forever? The thoughts were dangerous, he knew, but they were also irresistible. He had built his life around routines, work, and animals, but the ravine represented a part of himself he had never fully confronted. Standing there under the stars, he realized that avoiding it had not made it disappear. It had only grown larger in his mind, waiting for the day he might finally face it. The next morning, the heat was even stronger, and Samuel tried to focus on the work at hand. He repaired fences, fed the animals, and inspected the fields, but the thought of the ravine lingered like a shadow over his mind. He could hear the laughter of the friends as they explored the ranch again, but it felt distant, as if he were separated from them by more than just the space of the fields. The curiosity in them, harmless as it was, reminded him of the curiosity that had once led him to make mistakes long ago. Throughout the day, small things reminded him of the past. A broken fence post by the edge of the property, a tree branch bent in an unusual way, even the way the wind moved through the fields, all of it brought him back to the day he had decided to never speak of the ravine again. His hands worked automatically, but his mind wandered. He remembered the fear, the confusion, and the choices he had made in haste. The memories were not pleasant, but they were a part of him, and he could not ignore them forever. That evening, as the sun set, Samuel made a decision. He would not allow himself to ignore the past any longer. The ravine had been a silent part of his life for decades, but he realized that avoiding it had only allowed it to grow in his mind. He did not yet know what he would do, but he knew that he needed to face it, even if only a little. The friends were asleep, unaware of the storm of thoughts brewing in Samuel's mind. He walked slowly toward the edge of the ravine, stopping several times to catch his breath. The air was heavy with the scent of earth and grass, and the sounds of the night were louder here, closer to the dark void that waited below. Samuel's heart raced, and his palms were sweaty, but he could not stop. The curiosity, the need for understanding, and the desire to confront the memories were stronger than his fear. When he reached the edge, he looked down carefully, just enough to see the darkness below. His mind filled with fragments of memories, long-forgotten faces, sounds, and feelings that he had buried deep inside. He remembered the mistakes, the moments of hesitation, and the actions he had taken in desperation. It was horrifying and fascinating at the same time. The past was no longer distant, it was alive and staring back at him. Samuel stepped back, taking a deep breath. He felt both relieved and terrified. He had looked, but he had not crossed the line. The boundary remained, but he now knew that the ravine was more than just a physical place. It was a reminder of choices, consequences, and the fragile nature of human life. That night, he returned to his cabin, exhausted but strangely calm. He had faced a part of himself he had avoided for decades, and though it was only the beginning, it was a start. The friends never knew how close he had come to uncovering the full truth. They remained curious about the forbidden area, but Samuel's stern warnings kept them away. The weekend continued with laughter, work, and small adventures, but in Samuel's mind, the ravine had taken on a new meaning. It was no longer just a dark spot on the ranch. It was a symbol of human curiosity, fear, and the power of memory. And Samuel knew that sooner or later he would have to face it again, more fully this time, and deal with what lay hidden in its depths. For now, he returned to his work, his routines, and the animals that relied on him. The past had been stirred, but it had not yet consumed him. Samuel had taken the first step toward understanding, and though the path ahead was uncertain, he was ready to confront it, one small step at a time. The ravine remained off-limits, a dark, silent presence, but Samuel had begun to see it not as a threat, but as a part of life that demanded respect, reflection, and courage. The weekend passed quickly, filled with laughter, long walks, and the simple rhythms of ranch life. The friends had grown fond of Samuel and the vast, quiet land that seemed to stretch endlessly under the summer sun. Yet even amid the enjoyment, there was a quiet tension that only Samuel felt. Every glance at the edge of the property, every whisper of wind through the trees near the ravine, reminded him that something hidden waited below. He had managed to resist the pull of curiosity so far, but it was becoming harder with each passing day. On the last evening of the visit, after the friends had gone to bed, Samuel found himself unable to settle. Sleep eluded him, replaced by a sense of urgency he could not ignore. The night was warm, and the ranch was alive with the soft sounds of nocturnal life, the low murmur of the creek, the rustling of small animals in the grass, and the distant call of an owl. Samuel's eyes, however, were fixed on the ravine. It loomed in the darkness, an open wound in the land, and tonight it seemed to call him closer. Samuel approached slowly, his boots crunching on the dry gravel path. Each step felt heavy, as though the weight of years of memory pressed down on him. He paused at the edge, feeling the soft wind brush his face and carrying with it the earthy scent of the ravine. Looking down was like peering into another world. The darkness below seemed alive, whispering secrets that had been buried for decades. Samuel's heart pounded, a mixture of fear, anticipation, and something deeper, curiosity. He knew he was taking a risk. Some part of him wanted to retreat, to return to the safety of his cabin and ignore the past once more. But another part, stronger and more insistent, pushed him forward. He could no longer pretend that the ravine was just a shadow on the land. It was real, and it held answers, or reminders, he had avoided for too long. Slowly, Samuel leaned forward, careful to maintain his balance, and peered down into the depths. What he saw made him catch his breath. The darkness was not empty. Shadows shifted, revealing objects partially hidden beneath fallen leaves and dirt. There were shapes that stirred faint memories, objects from a time he had hoped to forget. Samuel's mind raced, trying to identify them, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with the life he had built since then. He remembered fragments of that day, the heat, the sudden panic, the decisions he had made in haste. And now here they were, visible again, forcing him to confront what he had tried to bury. He stepped back, his heart heavy with a mixture of horror and fascination. He knew that looking further could be dangerous, not in a physical sense, but emotionally. The memories that surfaced were raw and unrelenting. Samuel had lived decades trying to ignore them, but the sight of the ravine had torn the thin veil he had used to protect himself. The objects below were a bridge to the past, and he felt an almost irresistible need to understand everything fully, even if it meant reopening wounds that had never fully healed. Samuel crouched near the edge, straining his eyes to make out more details. There were fragments of wood, pieces of metal, and shapes that reminded him of the day that had changed everything. Each item was a silent witness to choices he had made, mistakes he had hoped would remain hidden. He remembered the fear, the uncertainty, and the sense of helplessness that had overwhelmed him. And now, decades later, he was forced to face it all again, fully aware of the consequences of ignoring it for so long. As he looked, his mind began to fill in the missing pieces of the puzzle. He recalled the people involved, the fleeting moments of panic, and the decisions that had seemed so necessary at the time. The past was no longer distant. It was immediate, pressing against him with a weight he had not felt in years. Samuel realized that his life on the ranch, so orderly and controlled, had been built around avoidance. The work, the routines, and even the animals had been a way to manage the fear he carried inside. Now, standing at the edge of the ravine, he understood that avoidance could only last so long. The past demanded recognition. Samuel felt a shiver run down his spine as he realized that what he saw below was not just physical remnants, but pieces of his conscience made tangible. The items and shapes reminded him that no one could truly escape memory or responsibility. They were waiting, patient and persistent, for him to acknowledge them. Despite the fear, Samuel took a careful step closer. His mind raced, warning him to stop, yet another part urged him to go further. He had spent decades living with half-truths, pretending that ignoring the ravine could erase what had happened. Now, it was clear that only facing it could bring any measure of peace. He reached for a long branch, testing the ground near the edge, and gently moved some of the debris to get a clearer view. The sight that emerged forced him to take a deep breath and steady himself. There, partially covered by dirt and leaves, were objects that told a story of fear, mistakes, and human vulnerability. Samuel recognized them immediately. Tools he had used that day, pieces of clothing, and a small, damaged box that seemed to have been discarded in haste. Each item was a reminder of his decisions and the consequences they had caused. Samuel's hands shook slightly as he brushed away more dirt, revealing the box fully. It was old, worn, and fragile, yet it contained the weight of years of hidden memory. Samuel felt a strange mix of emotions: relief that he had finally confronted it, horror at what he had done, and a deep, overwhelming sadness. He knelt beside the ravine, carefully lifting the box. Inside were letters, photographs, and objects that seemed to capture the day he had tried so desperately to forget. Each piece told a part of the story, a story that had haunted him in small ways every day since that moment. Samuel realized that these objects had remained untouched for decades because no one had dared to face the past. As he studied the contents, Samuel felt a wave of clarity. He understood now that the past was not just something to fear, it was something to learn from. The ravine had been a silent teacher, forcing him to confront the choices he had made and their consequences. He realized that human nature was fragile, and fear often led to decisions that could not be undone. But he also saw that acknowledgement and reflection could bring a sense of understanding and perhaps redemption. Samuel stayed at the edge of the ravine for hours, moving carefully, organizing the objects, and letting his mind process the flood of memories. The night sky above was vast and silent, yet the weight of the past seemed louder than ever. He thought about the years he had spent avoiding the truth, and he understood that the relief he felt now was the first step toward healing. Confrontation had been terrifying, but it had also been necessary. As dawn approached, Samuel stood and looked down one last time. The ravine, once a symbol of fear and avoidance, now felt different. It was still dark and deep, but it was no longer just a place to avoid. It was a part of his life, a reflection of human mistakes and resilience, and a reminder that even the most difficult truths could be faced with courage. Samuel carefully replaced the objects in the box, covering them gently with leaves and soil, ensuring they were safe but accessible. The act was symbolic, a gesture of acceptance rather than denial. He walked back to his cabin as the first light of morning touched the hills. The air was cool and fresh, and for the first time in decades, Samuel felt a sense of peace. He had faced the past, seen it fully, and survived. The ravine remained at the edge of his property, dark and foreboding, but Samuel no longer feared it in the same way. It was a part of him now, a reminder that curiosity and fear could coexist, and that the only way to overcome one was to acknowledge the other. The friends awoke later that morning, unaware of the confrontation Samuel had faced alone. They continued their weekend, enjoying the ranch and each other's company, while Samuel quietly prepared breakfast and tended to the animals. He spoke with them as usual, laughing and sharing stories, but inside he carried a profound sense of understanding. The ravine had been conquered not by avoidance but by courage. Samuel knew the journey was far from over. There would be more reflection, more lessons to learn, but he was ready. The day stretched on, warm and golden, with birds singing and the ranch alive with activity. Samuel moved through his tasks with calm determination, each step purposeful and measured. He glanced at the ravine several times, no longer with fear but with respect. It was a teacher, a mirror, and a reminder that some boundaries existed not to punish, but to guide. And Samuel, finally, was beginning to understand that guidance fully. After confronting the ravine and its hidden contents, Samuel returned to his cabin with a restless mind. Though he had finally faced a part of the past he had long avoided, something inside him had shifted. The objects he had uncovered were not just reminders of what had happened. They were symbols of human mistakes, consequences, and the power of fear. They demanded acknowledgement, but they also demanded action. Samuel could not ignore them, and the weight of that realization pressed heavily on him. That evening, while the friends were gathered around the fire, Samuel could not join in their light-hearted laughter. He felt distant, as though the events near the ravine had created a barrier between him and the rest of the world. He smiled politely when they spoke to him, but his mind was elsewhere, turning over thoughts he had tried to suppress for decades. The night was warm and still, the stars shining brightly above the quiet ranch, yet Samuel's inner world was stormy and chaotic. Finally, as the friends retreated to their cabins for the night, Samuel felt the pull of the ravine once more. He stepped quietly into the moonlight, moving carefully across the soft grass toward the edge. Each step was deliberate, every sense alert. The silence of the night amplified his own heartbeat, and even the faintest rustle of leaves or distant animal calls made him pause. The objects he had seen earlier were still there, waiting, hidden beneath layers of soil and leaves. Samuel knew he had to do something. He did not yet fully understand what, but the urgency was undeniable. When he reached the edge, he took a deep breath and knelt down to inspect the area again. The box, partially covered, seemed almost to call to him. Samuel gently lifted it and examined the contents once more. The letters, photographs, and small objects were fragile, their surfaces faded by years of exposure. As he held them in his hands, memories returned more vividly than ever, the decisions, the fear, and the sense of helplessness from that day. Samuel realized that ignoring this part of his past any longer would be impossible. Something had to be done. He began to organize the items carefully, sorting them in a way that made sense to him. The letters, once jumbled and partially torn, were laid flat. The photographs were arranged by memory, and the small objects were placed together. Samuel could feel the weight of the past pressing down, but he also felt a strange sense of clarity. This was not merely an act of curiosity, it was a necessary confrontation. He had to decide what to do with these remnants of a time he had long hoped to forget. As he worked, a thought occurred to him, a solution, though it carried a risk. He could attempt to conceal the objects completely, burying them more deeply in the ravine where no one would ever find them. It was a drastic step, but one that might protect both the memories and the peace of the ranch. At the same time, another part of him hesitated. Concealment could also feel like avoidance, a repetition of past mistakes. He knew that whatever action he took would leave a mark on his conscience, and he could not take it lightly. The decision weighed heavily on Samuel as he continued to handle the fragile objects. Hours passed, and the moon climbed high in the sky, casting long, silvery shadows across the ravine. Samuel's hands were steady now, but his heart raced with anticipation. He finally chose a spot deeper in the ravine, a place where the objects would be protected from the elements and from human interference. With careful movements, he began to dig, using a sturdy branch he had found nearby. Each scoop of soil brought him closer to resolving the conflict he had carried for decades. As the hole grew deeper, Samuel could feel the tension building inside him. The act of burying these objects was not just physical, it was symbolic. He was confronting the mistakes of the past, acknowledging their weight, and attempting to contain them in a way that would allow him to move forward. Yet, even as he worked, he could not fully escape the feelings of guilt and fear. The memories were alive, whispering in his mind, reminding him that the choices he made in haste decades ago had consequences that extended far beyond that day. Finally, the hole was deep enough. Samuel carefully placed the objects inside, arranging them as he had before. He took a moment to look down at the fragile contents, feeling a mixture of sorrow, relief, and determination. Then, with deliberate care, he began to cover them with soil, patting it down firmly to ensure it would remain undisturbed. The ravine, once a dark and foreboding presence, now held the remnants of memory and choice in a quiet, protected space. Samuel stepped back, breathing heavily, his mind racing with the enormity of what he had just done. But the act of concealment brought more than relief. It also brought a sense of horror. Samuel realized that, while he had hidden the physical remnants of the past, the emotional weight of that day remained within him. The memory, the fear, and the guilt could not be buried in the soil of the ravine. They would live inside him, shaping his thoughts and actions for years to come. The realization was sobering, but it also strengthened his resolve. He had faced the past, acted decisively, and now had to live with the consequences of both the original events and his actions tonight. As Samuel stood at the edge of the ravine, he felt a strange sense of duality, relief and horror intertwined, creating a complex mixture of emotion. The night was quiet now, the ranch asleep under the soft glow of the moon, yet Samuel's mind was alive with reflection. He understood that human beings were capable of extraordinary courage and profound mistakes, often in the same moment. His actions tonight were a testament to that complexity, an attempt to control what could not be fully controlled, to face what had been avoided for decades. Returning to his cabin, Samuel washed his hands in the cool water of the basin, feeling the soil from the ravine still clinging to his skin. He sat quietly, listening to the distant sounds of the ranch at night, the soft snoring of the animals, the gentle rustle of leaves, and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Everything seemed peaceful, but Samuel knew that the true peace would come not from hiding the past, but from understanding it, from accepting it fully. The night had been a turning point, and he felt the weight of responsibility settle firmly on his shoulders. Sleep was elusive that night. Samuel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment in his mind, the day long ago, the objects he had discovered, and the act of concealing them once more. His thoughts were vivid, sometimes painful, but also illuminating. He understood now that courage was not just about confronting danger or curiosity. It was also about facing the consequences of choices, about acknowledging the human capacity for error and learning from it. The ravine had tested him, and he had responded with both fear and determination. Morning came slowly, painting the ranch in soft shades of gold and pink. Samuel rose, still tired but resolute. The events of the night had changed something inside him. He moved through his routines with care, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and inspecting the fields, but his mind remained partially with the ravine. The physical task of concealment had been completed, but the emotional work was only beginning. Samuel knew that he would carry this experience with him for the rest of his life, not as a burden, but as a lesson in courage, responsibility, and human complexity. As the friends awoke and emerged from the guest cabins, Samuel greeted them with a calm smile. He participated in their laughter and conversation, but there was a quiet intensity in his eyes. They noticed nothing unusual, yet Samuel felt different, more aware, more grounded, and more mindful of the choices he made. The ranch was the same, the animals the same, and the sun rose over the hills just as it always had, yet Samuel had crossed an invisible line. He had faced the horrors of the past, acted decisively, and emerged on the other side with a newfound understanding of himself and the fragile nature of human decisions. Throughout the day, Samuel reflected on the events of the previous night. He understood that life on the ranch, so seemingly simple and predictable, had been a shield from the complexities of human morality and memory. The ravine, once a place of fear and avoidance, had become a mirror, reflecting the depths of human choice and consequence. Samuel knew that he would continue to live his life surrounded by the familiar routines of the ranch, yet the experience had changed him profoundly. He had acted, confronted, and survived, and in doing so, had learned lessons that could not be taught in any other way. By evening, the friends departed, leaving Samuel alone once more with his ranch and the silent presence of the ravine. He stood at the edge, looking down at the spot where the objects were hidden, feeling a mix of sorrow, relief, and respect. The ravine remained dark and deep, but it no longer inspired fear alone. It had become a testament to human courage, the complexity of memory, and the enduring lessons of past mistakes. Samuel turned back toward the cabin, ready to continue his life on the ranch, carrying with him the understanding that some boundaries must be faced, and some actions, though difficult, are necessary to achieve peace of mind. The days following the weekend felt quieter than usual. On the ranch, Samuel returned to his routines, feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending the fields, but the work now carried a different meaning. Each task seemed infused with reflection and awareness, as if the land itself was reminding him of the lessons he had learned from the ravine. Though the physical act of hiding the objects had been completed, the emotional and psychological consequences lingered. Samuel could not simply return to the old patterns of life. He had changed, and the change demanded acknowledgement. For the first time in years, Samuel allowed himself to reflect on the full weight of his past actions. The memories that had been stirred by the ravine, the fear, the mistakes, and the helplessness were no longer fleeting whispers at the edges of his mind. They were vivid, demanding attention and contemplation. Samuel understood that avoidance had given him temporary comfort but had done nothing to heal the wounds. Facing the truth, as difficult as it had been, had brought clarity and a sense of responsibility. The ranch itself seemed to respond to Samuel's new mindset. The animals, ever intuitive, moved calmly around him, as if sensing the steadiness in his heart. The fields and barns seemed brighter, the air clearer, and even the distant hills looked softer in the morning light. Samuel realized that the external world, though unchanged, reflected his internal state more than he had ever realized. The act of confronting the past, of acknowledging the mistakes and consequences, had given him a renewed sense of purpose and connection to the land he loved so much. Samuel also reflected on his relationships with others. Though he had lived a mostly solitary life, he had always cared deeply for the few people in his life, the friends who had visited, the townspeople who respected his work, and even casual acquaintances who had crossed paths with him over the years. The ravine, once a symbol of fear and avoidance, now reminded him of the importance of honesty, openness, and courage. Samuel knew that some boundaries were meant to protect, but they could also isolate. He resolved to be more mindful of how he interacted with others, balancing caution with connection. The hidden objects in the ravine continued to occupy Samuel's thoughts. While he had concealed them physically, he understood that their true purpose was symbolic. They represented accountability, the consequences of decisions, and the enduring nature of memory. Samuel considered whether he should revisit them, perhaps to document what he had learned or to ensure that they were preserved safely. He realized that by acknowledging the past openly, even silently to himself, he could transform the burden of memory into a source of wisdom. Over the following weeks, Samuel began to notice small changes in himself. He approached his work with greater mindfulness, paying attention to details he had once taken for granted. He spoke more gently to the animals, noticing their behavior and responding with care. Even his interactions with people became more thoughtful. He listened more deeply, offering advice or comfort when appropriate, drawing on the lessons he had learned from the ravine and the memories it had unearthed. Each day he felt a little lighter, as if the act of confrontation had begun to lift the weight he had carried for decades. The ravine itself, once a source of dread, had become a place of quiet reflection. Samuel sometimes walked near the edge during sunrise or sunset, observing the way the light played on the trees and the soil. He no longer approached it with fear, but with respect. The depth and darkness that had once seemed overwhelming now served as a reminder of the complexity of human life, the choices we make, the mistakes we face, and the courage required to confront both. Samuel realized that the ravine would always be part of his life, not as a place of horror, but as a teacher, silently guiding him toward understanding and acceptance. As the months passed, the ranch continued to thrive under Samuel's care. The crops flourished, The animals were healthy, and the land seemed more alive than ever. Samuel's routines, once mechanical, became rituals of reflection and gratitude. He understood now that every act of work, every interaction with the animals, and every step on the land was an opportunity to engage with life fully, to honor the past while moving forward. The lessons of the ravine were integrated into his daily existence, shaping not only his decisions, but also his perception of himself and the world around him. Samuel also began to document his experiences, writing carefully in a notebook he kept hidden in his cabin. He recorded the events of the past, the emotions they had stirred, and the insights he had gained. This exercise was not for anyone else. It was a personal act of acknowledgement and reflection. Through writing, Samuel found clarity, organizing his thoughts and emotions in a way that allowed him to process what had once seemed overwhelming. Each entry became a small step toward healing, a record of his journey through fear, curiosity, and responsibility. One morning, while tending the fields, Samuel noticed a young man from the nearby town walking along the path near the edge of the ranch. The young man had heard stories about the ranch and its mysterious ravine and was curious to see it. Samuel approached calmly, ready to explain the boundaries and expectations clearly. "This area is off limits," he said gently but firmly. "It's not safe to go down there, and it's not for anyone to explore." The young man nodded respectfully, understanding that some things were meant to remain undisturbed. Samuel realized that sharing his knowledge and setting boundaries was also part of the responsibility he carried, a way to protect others while honoring the lessons he had learned. Samuel's reflections extended beyond the ranch and its immediate surroundings. He thought about the nature of human curiosity, the drive to explore the unknown, and the risks inherent in seeking answers without understanding the consequences. The ravine had been a powerful metaphor for these themes, reminding him that some mysteries are not merely physical but emotional and psychological as well. Samuel understood that courage involved both action and restraint, and that wisdom came from recognizing when to confront and when to respect boundaries. Over time, Samuel felt a growing sense of peace. The memories that had once haunted him were no longer sources of fear but catalysts for growth. He had faced the past, acted decisively, and learned from the experience. The ravine, which had once been a symbol of horror and avoidance, had transformed into a place of reflection, teaching him lessons that extended far beyond the confines of the ranch. Samuel understood that human life was a balance of curiosity, caution, responsibility, and courage, and that the choices made in the face of fear defined the character of a person. By the end of the year, Samuel had embraced a new perspective on life. He continued his work on the ranch with dedication, but he also allowed himself moments of quiet reflection, observing the land, the animals, and the subtle rhythms of nature. The lessons of the ravine were never far from his mind, shaping his decisions and interactions. Samuel felt gratitude for the opportunity to confront the past and learn from it, recognizing that the experience had made him stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As the sun set one evening, casting long shadows across the fields, Samuel walked to the edge of the ravine. He looked down into the darkness, no longer with fear or dread, but with understanding and respect. The objects he had buried months before remained hidden, yet they were no longer burdens. They were symbols of the human capacity to face mistakes, take responsibility, and grow from experience. Samuel felt a quiet sense of closure, knowing that he had confronted both the past and himself, emerging with insight and peace. The ranch continued to thrive, and Samuel's life moved forward with a sense of purpose and balance. He welcomed visitors occasionally, sharing stories of the land and his experiences, always emphasizing the importance of respect, responsibility, and courage. The ravine, once a source of fear and horror, became a teaching tool, a reminder that the past cannot be ignored, but can be acknowledged and learned from. Samuel had faced the unknown, confronted his memories, and acted with intention, transforming a place of darkness into a source of wisdom. In the quiet moments of dawn and dusk, Samuel would reflect on the journey he had undertaken. The ravine had been a mirror, showing him both his vulnerabilities and his strengths. The objects he had uncovered and concealed symbolized the lessons of a lifetime, the consequences of choices, the power of curiosity, and the necessity of courage. Samuel understood that life was a delicate balance between fear and action, between avoidance and confrontation, and that the journey to understanding was ongoing, shaped by reflection, responsibility, and compassion. Samuel's story on the ranch became a quiet legend among those who knew him, not for the horrors he had witnessed or the objects he had hidden, but for the courage and wisdom he demonstrated. He had faced a part of himself that many would have ignored, acted with intention, and emerged with a deeper understanding of life, memory, and human nature. The ranch, the animals, and the once foreboding ravine were now intertwined in a story of growth, reflection, and resilience, illustrating that even the darkest moments could lead to insight and peace when met with courage and awareness. And so, life on the ranch continued, as it always had, but with a difference. Samuel moved through each day with mindfulness and gratitude, aware of the lessons hidden in the shadows and the value of confronting the past. The ravine remained, dark and deep, but it was no longer a source of fear. It was a reminder that boundaries, once crossed with care and reflection, could teach lessons far greater than any avoidance ever could. Samuel had faced the unimaginable, acted with intention, and emerged with a life enriched by courage, wisdom, and understanding, a true testament to the power of human resilience.